Hey guys, so I originally was not going to do this video since I figured the ban list would come this week and make this previous format a little irrelevant, but the list still is not out, so let's just go over the most played hand traps and staples from YCS Niagara. Before we continue, a huge thanks to my sponsors as always, links down below. Now this was the top 32 breakdown at YCS Niagara, courtesy of the Carlauncher store, so make sure to check them out on Facebook. Essentially a whole lot of Spright and Tears as expected, but I guess a little bit unexpected that Spright had a bigger representation than Tears. There were some other decks like Flu and Mathmech and Exosisters, which of course won the whole event. Now for this video we have 29 of the 32 lists available, and this is all thanks to Lundrady, who compiled all of the deck lists on Dueling Book, so a big shout out to him. This video certainly would not have been possible without his work, and I know that Subtail360 also does a ton of work compiling the list, so I'll have all of their links down below. As an overview on the number of hand traps, the median number has risen again to 9 compared to 7 last month, and if you saw my last breakdown of viewers last month, you'd know that the hand traps had fallen in favor of board breakers, but now it's back to hand traps again, I suppose. In the side, not too much higher than 2.5 last month, but we are at 3 hand traps in the side now. Speaking of going second board breakers, this ranged from 0 to 6 in the main and has fallen back down to a number that we typically have seen in the past 2 years at 3. In the side, this ranged from 0 to 10 with a median of 6 cards. Since at Euros a lot of people were opting for board breakers, maybe at this event people wanted to take their opponents by surprise by having more hand traps, not sure, but since we did have a lot of Spright in the top cut and they can play a lot of hand traps, that may be a factor as well. As for the most played hand traps, we actually have Nibiru claiming the number 1 spot. While people initially believed this card would be bad when Spright came out, it's actually the opposite, because Nibiru plus another hand trap can be devastating against Spright, and with the danger variant of Teralaments being more common, Nibiru can be more impactful as well. With Mathmech being another favorite deck of the format, this card is quite deadly against them too, with most players main decking this card if they played it. At second we have Infinite Impermanence, which continues to be really strong this format because Spright players tend to get read out for the monster negate to protect Gigantic, so Imperm is great, and this card is strong on Teralaments Rhinoheart as well. As usual, this was only main decked if played at all. At third is DD Crow, which of course is strong against Tears to stop the fusion summons from happening and is still one of the most played hand traps, although I think it's no longer unanimous in people's lists. Can banish the Ronin as well, and banishing the Mathmech Diameter while they are trying to bring it back with the trap to Xyz summon is good as well. Next we have Ash Blossom, which for the second month in a row now has fallen out of that number 1 spot which it usually claims. Still a good card of course, but isn't going to do too much on its own in this format, especially with the decline in play of branded variants where Ash and branded fusion was so huge. Tied at 4th is Cyframe Gear Gamma, which seems now to be predominantly a side deck card instead. Very strong against a normal summon effect and Spright, which could very well end their turn, although against Tears it can be a little tricky since destroying them can trigger their effects. Next we have Effect Veiler, which was only main decked if played at all. Great for effect negation, but also being a tuner has some application as well, whether to go into Hulk or maybe even bring it out with Hulk and bounce it back with Swap Frog. Then we have the most controversial hand trap at the moment in D-Shifter, which now not only sees play in Flunder but also as a side option in Spright Frogs and most infamously in the main deck for Exosisters. The OCG recently semi-limited this card to reduce the consistency of drawing it without completely killing it off, and I know a lot of people are hoping this card gets hit as it completely shuts off most strategies. Next we have Ghost Spell, which always goes up and down in play, not a bad card against strategies like Teralaments, and can also be used against Spright Elf, or even totally awesome if it was trying to negate a monster effect and set the monster. Can also protect Spright players against Gamma as well, which we've seen so far that it's popular again. Then we have Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries, really there to outsprite extra deck monsters for the most part, such as Gigantic or Elf, since there are so many Spright variants out there. Only side decked if played at all of course, and this usually sees play when we are in a format dominated by select 1 to 2 decks, which we are at right now. Lastly for hand traps we have Ghost Ogre, which is still useful against something like Flunder Map or the Brave Engine, although both of these are not seen as much as they were before. Can hit Gigantic too, but they usually get read out to negate that, so you'd want it paired with another hand trap. Now let's move on to the most played 15 side deck staples, and we actually start with Red Reboot at number 1, which has not been the case for a while. Considering that so many players are running cards like Eradicator Epidemic or Deck Devastation Virus, as well as Dimensional Barrier or even a Pointer, you really do need something like Red Reboot, as for the most part, it's the only way to stop cards like that. Next we have more quick play back removal hate in Cosmic Cyclone, and this seems to be the favorite over Twin Twisters now, particularly with spell trap protection going on in the current format like with the Runic stuff and their Mystic Mine. Then even more back row hate in Harpy's Feather Duster, so basically the 3 most played side deck staples were back row removal, especially since most of the talk out was Spright where they hard lose to Floodgates. Then surprisingly we have Dark Ruler at 4th, even though it was by far the most played staple in the last month's top cut breakdown. It's definitely a strong card, but playing Spright myself, I do understand that getting Dark Ruler doesn't really mean that it's the end, because Spright has such a good clapback game that it really is far from over. Next we have Call by the Grave, which has fallen a lot in play, not because it's not good anymore, but because there are so many danger Teralaments variants where Call by sorta ends up sucking because it's either going to get discarded by a danger effect, or if you set it first then you can't even use it that turn because it's a quick play spell. Then we of course have Super Poly, predominantly in tier builds, which is intimidating enough to force Spright players to no longer play Dupe Frog, as that makes Totally Awesome vulnerable to Super Poly. Really strong card, and the release of Garura has made it just so much better. Next we have yet another powerhouse card in Dimensional Barrier, which was all-sided if played at all, quite strong against many top decks in Spright, Teralaments, Mathmech, and the like. Interestingly, from my experience, Spright Teralaments can play around this decently well since they both have Fusion, Xyz, as well as Link plays in their arsenal. Then we have Dino Wrestler Pankratops, which has slowly started seeing more play recently after being absent for quite some time. It's good against any deck that puts up Elf because you can force that battle phase and attack over Elf, and also destroy another card in the process with its effect. Next we have Evenly Match, which is pretty strong against tiers, although with players running cards like D-Barrier or the Virus cards, you may still not be able to play that turn even after you wipe their board. Then a card we don't want to see on here but is a perfect representation of the flaws of our current time rules is Red Resonator. Basically a level 2 you can special up Gigantic to gain life for game, and it's particularly useful in Spright because the deck is awful in time due to the burn you take from Spright's starter. Next we have Eradicator Epidemic Virus, which is more of a Teralaments special where they try to dump it and bring it back with Griffin. Maybe it is one reason why the Spright players opted to go more for hand traps rather than power spells like in Euros. Then we have Forbidden Droplet, which is still seeing play despite Dark Ruler being the better monster negation card for this format since most players are not Scythe locking on standby phase anymore. Still useful to dodge targeting effects as well, and some players may opt to main deck this more than Dark Ruler as it can be used whether you go first or second. Next we have Solemn Judgment, which seems to be played more than a pointer for this format. Can stop Dark Ruler no more, or realistically most other cards for that matter, although it won't stop you from getting Lava Golem compared to if you had something like a pointer. I guess not many decks were playing that anyways, and Solemn is just very versatile. Then we have Mystic Mine, which fortunately did not see as much play in Top Cut compared to Euros or even YCS Rio, where Mystic Mine Burn won the event. Hopefully this card gets banned on the next list, and even if it didn't see as much play this time, it will always come back at some point if left unchecked. Lastly, we have Paleozoic Dinomischus being played in tier list. It's an interesting card since it does not discard for cost, so you can still trigger the tier effects, and this was a popular card in Trap Shadows back in the day to trigger their effects as well. Technically can be used to help make Toad too, since it can become a level 2 Aqua. Alright guys, so that was it for the breakdown of YCS Niagara. Hope you enjoyed that. I know the ban list is probably right around the corner and will be in a new format, but hopefully this breakdown will still help you with your deck building moving forward. As always, a big thanks to my Patreons, Eileen Dice Queen, Bolt Spider, Cybernetic, Brandon Jaren, Bear Lord, Spooky Boogie, and Stephen Phillips as always for supporting the channel. You guys are awesome. If you're interested in joining my Patreon, links down below. Take care guys.